Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. I'm thrilled to have a returnee to our show today. I want to welcome Money Skills for Therapists, Linzy Bonham. Linzy is a dedicated therapist and consultant specializing in helping her peers achieve financial serenity and mastery. As a creator of the acclaimed course, Money Skills for Therapists, she has empowered countless therapists and health practitioners to help control their finances with confidence and with ease. Linzy also hosts the Money Skills for Therapists podcast, where she expertly unpacks some of the complexities and challenges of private practice finances. We're excited to have Linzy with us today as we delve into practical strategies and insightful advice for overcoming money shame and achieving financial well-being in your practice. Linzy, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much, Graham, for having me.
It's great to have you here. I would love for our listeners, you got a cool kind of upbringing story. I know your father was in the kind of finances and accounting, and give us kind of a little bit of a background context for your personal journey with money.
Sure.
And how it led to you coming into not just your profession as a clinician, but also the nuts and bolts of practicing.
Yes. So very close. My mother was the one in finances, but my dad also has a very big
Got it.
impact on my story. So my own coming up around money was around having a mother who was very competent around money. She was an accountant. She was the highest woman in her company at that time in the 80s. She was kind of like a power corporate woman in accounting who just was always on top of things with money. So I got to watch her manage money when I was a kid, and I got to understand, okay, this is important, but also that there's a lot of potential with money. So something that I appreciate about my mom is her sitting me down when I was 17 and showing me, hey, if you invest this much a month, you're going to have $1 million by this age. I was like, mind blown. I was ready to receive it. So I have a lot of her personality. That being said, we don't always receive the personality, the teachings of our parents. My brother got the same lessons. Our lives look really different in terms of our relationship to money. But yeah, my coming up, I really had my mom modeling that piece. But then I also had my dad modeling that entrepreneurial spirit. He had a couple different businesses when I was growing up. My dad's businesses were not successful. So ultimately, my dad lost a business. It cost my family about $100,000 back in the 90s, which was a big financial blow to my family. So it's like I had this role modeling for my mom that money can be managed, but I also had my dad kind of model in a way that like business is hard and business is complicated. So I came into private practice holding both of those things at the same time.
Well, that's quite a story, having both sides,
Yeah.
seeing what it can be, seeing what some of the challenges are, and being an entrepreneur on your dad's side. That's kind of what we are as, practitioners, really, in some ways. We're going into our own business here, those that are in private practice,
Yes.
and really working to make things happen. I love this idea that, we can lead a horse to water, can't make a drink kind of idea, but there's got to be a readiness to receive. And I so hope those listening to our show today will kind of have a malleable spirit around a readiness to receive, to hear the things you can hold out, and ideally maybe begin to implement some of the things that it can be so important. Because I know as practitioners, and I think we're going to be talking more to those that aren't necessarily working, let's say, for a managed care organization, let's say like a Kaiser or for an agency, basically where everything is done from, all their taxes typically taken out, to patients being scheduled, to the furniture already being preset in their office, and probably even some kind of a retirement plan set up in that process as well. And I'm sure you work with some of those as well, but I'm also anticipating that the majority of this is going to be practitioners that are more the entrepreneurs going into their own private practices. And I know it's not just mental health. I know you work with other folks as well. So practitioners have so many roles to play, and they are wearing a lot of hats. So those are in practice for themselves. What are some of the areas, let's just name them, that they have to wear a hat for? For example, withholding the right amount of taxes for estimated taxes. Talk about some of the hats that practitioners tend to wear or have to wear to be successful.
Yes. That's one of the least favorite hats of mine, is the taxes hat. I've met very few therapists in private practice who love managing and paying taxes. So yeah, I mean, many, many hats. So we have the taxes hat. We have the hat of being a business person who has to have the big picture perspective on the business. Like, what is the fee that I have to charge? and the amount of clients that I need to see per week, combined with the business expenses that I'm spending that give me a sustainable paycheck for myself. Like there's a big picture perspective that you need to have there. And that would basically be your CEO, CFO hat, right?
Yes.
Your CFO hat, really, of the big picture. Is this business even built to succeed? Could I have 100 clients a week and still this business is not paying me well enough because of how I set it up? So
Right.
there's that hat. Then we have our CEO hat, which is the hat of making the strategic decisions to make the business work, right?
Yeah.
So like having to have a fee raising conversation with your clients or having to drop a certain insurance panel because it just doesn't pay you well enough or it's too
Yeah.
much of a headache to work with them. It's not worth it to your business. So being able to steer the business thoughtfully is your CEO hat. But then, of course, the hat, our favorite hat, is our clinician hat. And that's where most folks get stuck. That hat can get a little tight. It gets a little stuck on our head to extend, the metaphor a little bit. And we don't want to take that hat off. And so it can be hard to have those conversations about fees or decide to go off insurance panel or start seeing less clients a week because it's not sustainable for you because we're always thinking about our clients, right? We're always thinking about their needs and we're thinking, well, this person, I don't want to have a hard conversation with them because they just had this big fight with their mom and they're really
Right.
dysregulated, or
Right.
this person's father just passed away, or this person just had a pregnancy loss. Like we know the really hard things that our clients are going through. And it can be really, really hard for us to take off that hat to sometimes do the things that we need to do to have a sustainable practice and for us to be okay financially and emotionally.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Whether you're a longtime or first-time listener to Behavioral Health Today, you're probably familiar with Triad, the company that brings you this podcast. But you may not know that Triad also hosts a community for current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, featuring trending content and education and career resources, all for free. If you are a behavioral or mental health professional, or you're studying to become one, join more than 80,000 people on Triad by claiming your free professional account today. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT and join the Triad community today.
There's so many pieces I want to delve into just for a second, but in a moment. But I remember going through school and there was almost this sense of this is an altruistic field where if you're thinking about money and if you're having to have these talks, well, are you really there in the best possible way?
Mhm.
And can you really have a heart and also say, I've got to up my fee, or you know what, I'm no longer going to be participating, but we can maybe do, fee for service type, arrangement together here. It's hard, isn't it, in the mental health
Mm.
field, because there's almost this indoctrination
Yes.
that
Yes.
money and therapy, money and helping can't necessarily seem to go together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you use the word altruism, which I think is a generous term. Other terms could be that we're taught to be martyrs, we're taught to be self
I,
sacrificing.
let's go there. Yeah.
And most folks who go into the helping professions, whether they're mental health therapists, which is, our zone, or whether they're speech language pathologists or occupational therapists, like there's lots of folks in the other fields who have similar traits to us. Usually we've been helpers our whole lives. Like we were
Yes,
already helpers. We
that's
were
right.
already the 12-year-old who all the other 12-year-olds came to talk about their problems.
And
Right.
part
And
of
so,
that, as you're saying, part
yeah,
of that is even sacrificing your own needs
yes,
to be there for others, whether that's what worked in my
100%.
family or got me attention or got me love or keep me from getting hit. There's always that sacrificial piece in that role on the reciprocal side for the therapist, now therapist, but once upon a time, a child therapist, if you will, that has to lose themselves in order to make other relationships work. But there's a need underneath there that gets met in the process.
100%. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're already used to usually self-sacrificing ourselves
Yeah.
in these other ways, as you mentioned, before it becomes a professional vocation for us. It's, yeah, maybe sacrificing ourselves socially, sacrificing our voice in the family. Like there's a strategy here. There's a way of getting needs met. There's a way of being safe and seen or belonging. But when we bring that into private practice and it becomes your business, now the
Yes.
sacrifice shows up in a few areas, but a new area that it shows up is financially, right? So now maybe not only am I working too hard, seeing more clients than I can really afford to see emotionally, like I'm exhausting myself. Maybe I'm, seeing clients that aren't perfectly aligned, but I feel bad telling them that I'm not the right therapist for them. So maybe
Right.
I'm already making sacrifices in that way, but now also I might just be making no money. And now
Yes.
financially, the rest of my life is in stress
Right.
because I'm not able to stand up for myself and assert my needs in this area of my life, this financial area.
Or just to name that too. I mean, you're thinking about if you have children, you're looking for their schooling. You're
Mhm,
looking, if you're doing private practice, you're paying for your own mental health, your own health care.
mhm.
You're putting your own retirement aside. These things aren't ready made for you. There are like you went back to earlier, all the different hats, all the different roles that you have to become kind of expert in. Otherwise, you're doing great work behind the therapy door, but outside, like you just mentioned, your life is in chaos. So some of the things around this, I want to go a little bit deeper on the money. Talk about this idea of societal norms around money, money shame,
Mhm.
maybe family upbringings, the lack of knowledge or mastery or sense of control. We mentioned the indoctrination around therapists, but take it into those other areas for us to just maybe kind of normalize and kind of make universal for us as therapists
Yes.
why this is not that surprising.
Yeah. I mean, the default for people in the world, even non-therapists, is that they tend to feel and be underinformed and undereducated around
Yeah.
money, feel unprepared for the future. The
Yep.
majority of people know or believe they're not saving enough for retirement. The
Yes.
majority, right? And so it's actually much more normal than not to have stress and insecurity about money. That's a default, right? And that comes back to our education system. That comes back to the way that there's a silence around money culturally and in families, right? So this is like the first part is that even though, I've seen lots of jokes always come up at tax time in the social media space where it's like, well, I'm so glad that I took trigonometry now that this trigonometry season has come around. It's like we learn all of these very specific academic things with the
Right.
idea that, we're expanding our minds, but we don't learn how to manage money. We
Balance
don't
your
learn how to save
checkbook.
for
Yeah.
retirement. We don't learn how
Come
to
on.
put aside enough for taxes, which you inevitably have to do. Like that's a non-negotiable part of adulting. In fact, if you don't do it, you can literally go to jail.
Yeah.
So we're kind of set up to fail, all of us, right? Then you add on top of that our family dynamics. So, there's this saying that kids are great observers, terrible interpreters. So we tend to watch what our parents do about money. We make up
Yes.
stories about what that means.
Yes.
They might end up modeling things to us about money that we make up a story that they would never want us to think, but they don't realize that, this is what we've taken away. Or we inherit their negative or not helpful stories about money or their conflicts about money. Maybe you have one parent who is always really tight-fisted around, the wallet. There's like never, nope, you can't afford that. We can't afford that. You can't go on that school trip. You can't afford that. And then the other parent goes on random shopping sprees. That's very confusing, right? And so we inherit all of these stories and behaviors like it's in the air, for the first 17, 20 years that we spend with our family of origin. And so often we also come into adulthood with all of these stories and narratives about money that aren't even ours. And maybe
Yes.
things that made sense for our parents. Maybe if your parent migrated, they have a certain story about money that totally makes sense for their situation, but doesn't make sense for your anymore. But we end up inheriting other people's money stories that we carry into adulthood on top of our own new experiences and money stories that we develop. So there's so many layers here.
I think it's a really great reminder. I mean, we do what we know,
Yes.
and we come to know something by what was modeled, what we were raised in, and it feels familiar. It's syntonic, and to do something different creates anxiety, uncertainty, and so even if we're repeating things that take us into the hole,
Hmm.
we tend to do it, and maybe we
Yes.
assign meaning to it, like, well, this is what we do, or this,
Yes.
we maybe assign meaning to like a martyr piece, or.
Hmm.
But interestingly, on the other side of that, what are we doing as therapists? We're teaching people how to set boundaries, how to communicate. We're talking about teaching people how to value themselves, and we're helping them build these things while oftentimes within ourselves, we're kind of bleeding out while we're helping
Yeah.
them kind of repair the holes that they've got so they can really thrive in their life.
Yes.
I oftentimes talk to folks, that are, early career practitioners, and sometimes it's hard for them to see their value, even though they've gone to school, for the last 10, 12 years, even more than that, would they have to do some, hours collection. And I say, when you go into a grocery store, you walk out with a bag of groceries, and that's the commodity for the store. You pay for that. Your commodity is two things. It's your time and your expertise. That's why people are coming to see you.
Mhm.
And the diagnosis you make, the prescriptions for treatment you make, your time, your expertise, what you've developed in terms of being a specialist in this area, that is a value. It changes people's lives permanently. But oftentimes we think, well, we're just, talk therapy. Is that really something? Or am I really making that big of a difference? The fact is, if you're doing it right, absolutely you are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about you. You have practitioners come and see you,
Mhm.
and they're saying, Lindsay, throw me a lifeline. Help me out here, or I'm not sure where to start, or I've tried. I'm not as successful as I want to be. I have, let's go back to what you said at the very beginning. I have a readiness to receive,
Mhm.
and I am hoping, which is cool. Walk through kind of how you frame for them. I know you've got a 4-step process, but just talk a little bit about how you address them, and maybe even start to help them maybe begin with changing their mindset, and walk us through some of these things.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that I always support and encourage folks to do, and this is the first step of the framework that I walk them through in Money Skills for Therapists, my course, is to commit. And committing has a few aspects to it, but a lot of it, Graham, is really starting with a being with. Most folks that I work with have a very avoidant relationship with money. So they're like, basically look at their bank account only when absolutely necessary. I just had a conversation today with a wonderful student in my course, and I said, okay, so for paying yourself, like, what about your paychecks? And she was like, well, I don't take paychecks. And I was like, well, are you getting paid from your business? She's like, oh, I just take money. But it's like there's this avoidance of like, that's actually a paycheck. You're actually doing a thing there. Something's happening, right? We could have
Right.
this kind of like almost like grab it and run away relationship to
Yes.
money. And so one of the first things that we need to do is really commit to actually having a relationship with money, being with it, being able to look at your bank account and see what's happening in there, be curious, look at your numbers, like how much are you actually making in your practice? How many folks are not showing up for sessions? Are you actually enforcing your cancellation fees? There's so many pieces of what are just data, really. It's just
Yes.
numbers that are so scary for us to be with that at first we need to start to build up the muscle to just be with this information without spiraling into, as you mentioned earlier, shame, money
Yes.
shame, without spiraling to other types of dysregulation, negative stories that we've been carrying for decades often.
Yes.
And so that committing often starts with zooming out of where you are, like, why is this worth it? Like,
Yes.
spoiler, this is probably going to suck sometimes. You're going to wish that you weren't here. You're going to wish that you just kept avoiding. So why are you here? Is it because you actually want to be able to retire one day? Is it because you want to pay for your kids' college and you are like really behind on saving? Is it because you want to have a house? Or do you want to save for maternity leave? That's something that I support a lot of my students in doing. Like, what is the real reason? What is it that money is going to do for you in your life that will really materially change your life and reflect your values and allow you to create more meaning in the life that you're living, that money's going to do for you, that makes this work worth it? Because if it's just another should, we're not going to do it because it sucks. Like, I know that I probably
Yep.
should walk 10,000 steps a day. That sounds terrible. So I'm not going to do it. Right? Like, should doesn't get us anywhere. You have to really be connected to an authentic personal reason or set of reasons to commit to the work and keep coming back to it, even when you don't want to, because it's a long-term process.
As you get us out of the gate right here, and you're talking about this idea of you got to commit.
Yeah.
Anything you do starts with that.
Mhm.
If you're not in, you're either in or you're out. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. There's nothing in the middle. You either are or you aren't. And I love this idea of walking them through this, because as you're talking, you are going to be kind of a corrective emotional other for them, aren't you? You're going to be reframing
Yes.
so many things, conversations they didn't have, value you're going to convey about who they are, what they do, what they provide, and also some direction that kind of takes the spooky part out of it, or the anxiety piece out of it, or the shame out of it.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that relationship with you is going to be really critical from the start as, again, that corrective emotional other.
Yes. Yeah. And it's the relationship with me, and it's also the relationship with community, right? Because
Mm.
there's going to be some elements of their experience that I actually can't personally relate to, right? Like, I actually was pretty lucky with my grounding around money, both in terms of just my brain. And I always liked math when I was a kid. I could tell you lots of math stories from being a little kid. Most of my students did not like math as a kid. They still don't, right? So there's what I bring to the table of being able to slow it down and allow
Yeah.
them to be with something that maybe they would just usually be like, oh, that's the feeling where I walk away from the computer and I never come back. Right. Let us like slow down and be like, oh, what is that? Oh, that's the belief that I'm stupid. It's like, oh, wow. Of course you don't want to
Yeah.
work on this. Who wants to sit in the belief that they're stupid? Right. And so there's that corrective experience of us being able to be together in that. But there's also the experience of being in a call. Often on my course calls, there'll be 15, 20 people who are nodding along and who are in the
Yes.
chat are like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I feel exactly the same way.
Right.
And that's that universal experience, right? Like, that's where that's takes away the shame. You thought this was you. You thought something was wrong with you. You thought
Yes.
that you were dumb because you didn't understand this. Well, all these other amazing folks on this call who've accomplished so much also don't understand this, right? Maybe this
Wonderful.
is not that there's something wrong with you. Maybe that
So
there's
you,
something
yeah.
wrong with these systems that we are navigating, and we can learn and change.
So you start with, you got to be in, and you start with kind of helping them frame kind of a mindset around this. Where do you go next?
Yeah. So after we do that piece, the committing, and then working on the money stories, there's some digging in there, of course, a little bit of that like self-guided therapy of what do I believe about money? What do I want to believe? Then we move into the next step is clarifying. So after we commit, we clarify. This is not always fun. Sometimes when people think that they're a financial hot mess, they look at their numbers and realize, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought.
Uh-huh.
Other times they look at the numbers and they're like, oh,
A
this is as
financial
bad
hot
as I
mess.
thought. So this isn't always the
Right.
funnest part, right? But this
Right.
is where we start to teach you the skills to actually understand what's happening with your numbers. How much is coming
Yeah.
into your practice every month? How much is going out? How much are you getting paid? How much are you setting aside for taxes? Are you setting aside anything for taxes? Are you setting aside way too much for taxes? Sometimes folks are oversaving for taxes, right? So this is where you're starting to get that clarity in terms of understanding your numbers and starting to create clear systems so numbers are clear in the future, right? One of the biggest mistakes that therapists make around money, which is a mistake they make on day one, is they run their business out of their personal bank account. So all their money is, I do this motion, this is podcast and nobody can see it, but fingers are all locked together. This is
Yep.
enmeshment, right?
Yep.
Your money and your personal money and your business money is enmeshed. It's confusing. What is what? Was that Amazon purchase for work or was it for home? So we get you into understanding your numbers, creating separation and clarity. Boundaries are good for everybody, right? And
Yes.
then setting up systems so you continue to have clarity going forward. You start to track your money and you don't no longer have that thing at tax time where you're like, oh no, I have to find a year's worth of information right now. This is hell. Instead of having that experience, if you're tracking your money as you go, you're like, okay, here's the information I need. What is my accountant asking me for? Right. That's a very different experience. And that's creating clarity as you go to also save yourself that future headache. You know, you're taking care of it a little bit at a time, getting clarity week by week so that it never builds up into this big pile, that is definitely worth avoiding.
Yes. So good. So we're committing, we're clarifying, even if it's bad news, at least we know where we stand. And now we can do something about it. And there's something I think emboldening around, you know what? I was courageous enough to know that I am a financial hot mess,
Mhm.
but good for me. I've got people encouraging me and kind of supporting me. Maybe there's one or two in the group that are, raising their hands and say, yeah, I'm there too. But at least we've got a path out and we're not just avoiding and living in fear, further shame, et cetera. And now we can begin to plan for something. So step 3,
Adjust. So this is
adjust.
where you get clear and you get to start making changes. So this is the part of the process and the part of the course where I slide in that word that everybody hates, which is budgeting, right? This is where you actually start to look at, okay, how am I actually going to purposely plan the flow of my money in advance? So money is not something that is happening to me, but I'm
Yes.
happening to it.
Yes.
I'm setting up my schedule so that I am charging the fee and working the amount of sessions that allows me to get paid well, allows me to do the trainings that I want to do, allows me to take the time off that I want to take, lets me show up as the best therapist I want to be, right?
Yes.
Those are all part of adjusting. And then also starting to direct money towards the things that maybe you never thought you could actually save for, like retirement. Sometimes with
Yes.
folks in my course, I've had several folks join my course recently who are in their late 50s, 60s, even late 60s, and they're not saving for retirement, right? And so we could, spiral into panic and shame about the fact that they should have started this 20 or 40 years ago, right? But the first step is often starting to send $100 a month to retirement,
Yep.
sending $200 a month to retirement, just seeing like, I do actually have some money to put to retirement,
Right.
right? And part of it is seeing yourself doing it. Like it takes a while to catch up with yourself sometimes, but if you can let yourself have that kind of loving observer part of you that sees like, hey, saving for retirement. I never thought I could do this. That builds the confidence to realize, oh, if I just charge a little bit more, I could save even more for retirement.
Yep.
Right. And so this is the adjusting where we're making the numbers work and we're taking the action so that money flows where you actually need it to go.
Really good. I would imagine in this step right here, you're also addressing this maybe a concept of self-worth,
Mm-hmm.
being able for them to
Yeah.
see that one, just don't need to do this, but there's a self-worth piece in this.
Mm-hmm.
Talk
Mm-hmm.
about how you
Yeah.
address that part.
Yeah. I mean, the self-worth piece, money touches on everything. This is
Yes.
slowly what I'm coming to settle on is money is about safety. It's about connection and belonging. It's about self-worth. It's about having your physical needs met. It's about opportunities and possibilities. And that self-worth piece is one of those really sneaky pieces that can stop us from taking the action we actually want to take, right? So when we have some sort of belief deep down that I'm not good enough. The services that I'm offering are not good enough. I'm not really changing anybody's life. Kind of like you were talking about earlier, this like intangibility of like, well, what am I really doing? I'm just sitting in a
Yes.
room talking to people. There's no way that's worth $150 or $175 to somebody,
Yes.
right? When we have those narratives running, it is very, very difficult to make the changes that we need to make to actually create a financially sustainable practice and life for ourselves.
Yeah.
So there's two things here. First of all, your fee is not a reflection of your self-worth. Your fee is a number that you are agreeing on with a client. This
Yes.
is about commerce and transaction, right? So that's the first thing. So if I'm living in rural Nebraska and the fee that makes sense for where I am in my life is $100 an hour. That doesn't mean that I'm worth less than somebody who's living in San Francisco charging $250 an hour. They're not 2.5 times more valuable than me. They just live in a city that has
Good
a
point.
higher,
Yes.
standard of income, that
Yes.
also has a higher cost of living. So they need to make more. Their clients already make more, right? And so your fee is never a reflection of who you are and your value, right? But your fee is an agreement between you and your clients on what they are able and willing to pay you for the work that you do, right? And really embodying the value of the work that you do, knowing, like, as you said earlier, this is changing lives, what I'm doing.
Yes.
This is not just like entertaining somebody for an hour, right? This is doing work with people that is helping them to heal and change things that they've been living with for decades, that will literally improve the quality of everyone around them. The quality of everyone's life around them is going to improve because of this work
Yes.
that we're doing together. And so that's often where I go with folks when I find that they're having a hard time actually making the move to raise their fee if that's what I've identified they need to do, or going off insurance or claiming a niche, is I get them to think about not just like, who are you and what's valuable to you, but like, let's just think about the value of the work for a minute. Tell me about the best client you've ever had. Tell me about how your work ended. Tell me about like what they said at the end of their time with you. Because we all have that client who were like, wow, person's life like completely changed in the course of our work
Absolutely.
together. And maybe it wasn't a coincidence.
Mhm.
Maybe I had
Yeah.
something to do with it. So
Right.
that's often what I do with folks, is like amplifying that experience of like, let's really get you honed in on just how valuable this work is to your clients. Start charging that fee. See that people are paying you that fee and they're totally happy. And it's a little bit of a fake it till you make it. Start to take in the fact that maybe you are a therapist who can easily command $175 an hour. And that can start to change the way that folks hold themselves. And that's something that people have told me, is like, by charging more, the fee that they actually identified, commanding that fee, holding to it, they start to hold themselves differently because they realize
Sure.
that other people are taking them seriously. And so they take themselves more seriously too.
That's a great reciprocal piece to that. I think there is something, I want to kind of re-nudge and maybe kind of massage a little bit this
Yeah.
continued readiness to receive as we talk and people are listening today, because these are some really great gems that you're bringing in here. I want to go back to one of the piece here too with the third one. We've got commit, we've got clarify. Now we're talking about adjusting. You're talking about this idea of budget,
Mhm.
but really there's really freedom in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
There is freedom in that.
Mhm.
And there's certainty, there's value,
Yes.
self-value, there's worth, and it allows you, if you got everything else paid, you've got this, budgeted for this, go
Mhm.
play, with what
Mhm.
you've got
Exactly.
budgeted. So
Yes.
there's a real
Yes.
freedom, isn't there, in that?
There's real opportunity with budgeting to actually align your money with your values. At the end of the day, that is what is actually the best use of money for all of us, right? When you see your money bringing the best things into your life and really reflecting the things that you value the most, that is better for you than any fancy this, fancy that, luxury XYZ. Like, most folks are going to tap out on those kinds of experiences pretty quickly. But the budgeting allows you to actually put your money towards what matters to you. I'm reading the book right now, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I don't know if you've read it, Graham. I had a student recommend it to me years ago, and I'm a big Cal Newport fan, and I just heard Cal Newport recommend it as well. And this book is basically this anti-time management book. It's railing against this idea that we have a culture that, without saying it explicitly, tries to convince us that we can do everything, right? Like, of course, I should be able to train for a marathon and be the best mother that I can possibly be, and run a $500,000 business and be the best wife ever, and this and that. We put an immense amount of pressure on ourselves, and we try to learn how to be more efficient with our time. So it's almost like we can live 6 different lives at once, is what we're trying to do,
Absolutely.
right? But what he talks about is this concept of the word decide. And he says that the word decide, when you make a decision, has a very similar linguistic root to homicide and suicide, in that it's an end, it's a cutting off, right? When we decide, we are taking a path, and in doing that, we're also cutting off other possibilities. We're committing. And we can be really scared of doing that in our culture because we kind of want to have it all. Even
Yes.
if we don't actually want to have it all, even if I know
Yes.
these things won't make me happy, I look at my neighbor and they have a nice XYZ. So I think maybe I need that. And so a budget is really you deciding. It's you saying, you know what? We don't actually value eating out that much. So let's keep that to $100 a month, because whenever we do that, we're kind of like, was that worth it? But
Right.
instead, we're going to put the money, $100 a month, away into a fund. And in 2 years, we're going to go to Ireland because that's what matters to us,
Right.
right? Like, it's so powerful to do that. And it's scary to really own that power. But when you do, there's a podcast called Afford Anything. At that point, you can afford anything. You can't afford everything, but you can afford anything, right? You can use the resource that you have, this money, this tool, to make whatever happen in your life that you want to have happen. And that is immensely powerful once you really step into that space.
This concept that you're kind of touching on here, this idea of intentionality around priorities, around pausing and thinking, what do I value? What do I want?
Yeah.
What's important to me? What would I need? And this idea around deciding, I recently thought about everything that I want to do in my life right now. I want it to be generative. I want it to be something leading to something that's in line with what you're saying right here, the intentionality around priorities, something that holds value and worth, not just for myself, but it ripples out into other areas that are important to me. So it's such a cool piece. And sometimes we don't pause to think, well, what is important to you? Well, I got to pay my bills. I know. But really underneath that's just a weekly or a monthly thing you've got to do. Really, what is, Simon Sinek talks about, what's your why? What are you doing? What's your why around that? So this whole idea of living life intentionally, purposefully, priority driven, then begins to set these other things up. And a lot of people haven't learned that. And I would imagine when they come into your program and having you talk about these things, there must be kind of a little bit of maybe an awakening to this, or this idea that, wow, I never even thought, it never came to mind. We never had these conversations in my family of origin. They might be for the very first time with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a course. Money Skills for Therapists is a course about money, but secretly it's also a course about actually building a life that you enjoy.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that's the point of money at the end of the day. Money is about exchanging your energy for other goods and services. And what's the point of you spending your energy? So that you're getting a life that you actually appreciate. And the book 4,000 Weeks that I mentioned a moment ago, the premise of that book, the 4,000 weeks, is that on average, each of us, our life is 4,000 weeks long. Right? So it's like, sometimes we can feel like life is never ending, but really it's 4,000 weeks. So it's like you get 4,000 Mondays, you get 4,000 Tuesdays. So how do you want to use those? Right?
Yep.
What is going to be a life that at the end of your life, you're like, oh, I did it. I lived a life that I really enjoyed. I did what I wanted to do. And many of us don't do that, right? So there are so many rich discussions that happen in our course about, like what really matters to you, right?
Wonderful.
And this path that you're going down, is it your path? Is it someone else's path that they've nudged you down? We have so much opportunity as private practitioners, and I'm really passionate about that, to build a life that we actually want. But first we need to know what we actually want.
Very good. So rather than just living a hand-me-down life that was maybe your folks, which there's no judgment around that, they made a decision as best they could consciously, but we get to be more conscious around what we choose to do. So we've already committed, we've clarified, and we've adjusted. Bring it home for us. Number 4.
Implement. So you got to keep it up. So
all right.
Something that I've taken to saying recently is money is a lifelong relationship.
Yes.
So many students come to my course, especially if they are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're like, okay, I'm finally going to work on this. There can be this tendency to want to just power through it, get it done. And it's like, spoiler, unfortunately, it's never done, right? We're always going to be managing money until the day we die. There's going to be financial decisions to make. And so implementing is about keeping it up, building the habits that this just becomes a regular or neutral, or sometimes it even becomes an exciting and positive part of your weekly rhythm of your life. I call it money time, sitting down with your money, taking care of these things, rechecking that your numbers are reflecting your values, right? Just taking care of these little tasks so they never pile up. That is implementing. And it's just making this into almost basically a non-issue in your life so that your energy goes towards the things that you really enjoy. You get to focus in on the stuff that really lights you up.
Really good. Give us a story that kind of stands out for you. Someone coming in, say a practitioner, and they're saying, Linzy, girl, you got to help me here. Tell us a little bit about that person.
Yes. So one person who comes to mind, I don't think she'd mind me using her name because she coached for me afterwards. She's a rock star.
Sweet.
She came into the course as what she would call a financial hot mess. So it was like, even though she was making good money, she had done hard work to raise her fee, right? She was like making more money than she ever thought possible. She didn't have anything to show for it. It just kept disappearing, right? So it's like she constantly had that experience of thinking, okay, once I go full-time private practice, money will work. And it's like, I still don't have money. Once I raise my fee, money's going to work. Then she still didn't have money. So she came into the course basically like, okay, it's obviously something is missing here. Something's got to give. And what she realized in the course of working through Money Skills for Therapists is she didn't have any skills, right? And so there was just this deficit of skills that she'd never learned. Like most of us never learned them, right? Like she never learned how to budget or plan, right? She never learned how to really think about, where do I want my money to go? And like, where is it not going to serve me?
It really is just a skill set, isn't it? It's not something we're born with. It's not like, oh, dude, I don't have the DNA for that. I'm screwed. It's no, these are things that we can learn.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why I
Yeah.
call the course Money Skills for Therapists, to try to really emphasize like, you learned how to ride a bike and you can learn this too, right? If you didn't learn how to ride a bike till you were 45, you can still learn how to ride a bike, right? Even if you didn't learn when you were 10, like ideally you would have. So yes, it really is learning that skill set. And so then coming out of the other end of the course, well, actually, I will say when I got to the end of the course with Jaleisha, I used to run this as only a 6-week course. So she was kind of like, I think I'm figuring it out. I don't know. Like, it's not like I was like, okay, she's got this in the bag. I was kind of like, okay, well, good luck. Now I make this a 6-month course. So that part is
Good.
gone. But then I went on my maternity leave because I took a year off with my son. I'm Canadian, and that's how we do it up here. And I sent out one email to my list, just to some sort of little nurture email. And she replied and she was like, Lindsay, you have changed my life.
Wow.
And she shared
That's
how
sweet.
she
That's sweet.
had managed to get her money in such working order that she could rent her own apartment in New York City, which she had never been able to afford before. She'd always had to have roommates. She got her own place in New York City as a single woman. She was saving for vacations in advance and taking vacations that were already paid for. She was like booking a buffer of time. So when she came home, she had 2 or 3 days to settle back in before she started working again. And like she was living this version of her life that she never thought possible. And
No,
the
wonderful.
phrase that she used is like she was seeing herself being something she never thought she could be, which is disciplined around her money. And it's not that she was being rigid or self-denying, but it's that she had a clear plan and she was actually following it. So the money that she was already making, that she was already commanding, was finally going where she actually wanted it to go.
It's a great story. Great story. I, in the last probably 7 years of my practice, I've been practicing for a while, but last 7 years, I've been doing a number of groups, whether it's a group from a training a colleague and I might do, or kind of a consult group afterwards, those that really want to implement at a deeper level. We taught them, we have a early career practitioner group, and the power of groups is amazing. It's just phenomenal. We did it's still run after about 4 years now, a group with some first responders that were all docs that were responding to COVID, that were just losing their minds because of the demands put on them. And they become just a phenomenal group together and just blazing trails into other areas of their lives. Do you do any follow-up groups where folks that connect during their time with you and say, hey, I kind of, let's do this together, and how can we be an encouragement? Are there groups as part of your course, Lindsay?
I mean, in the time in the course, they, have the course calls together and they often form into like little
Yeah,
subgroups sometimes. And we also
right.
we assign people accountability buddies. So if they want, we
Nice.
match them with somebody else where, we have them do a questionnaire of like, what kind of support do you like to receive? Are you somebody who needs like a little like positive
Right.
reinforcement, or will that make
Right.
you scream? Right. Like making sure that they're compatible. So we set folks up in those relationships together, which often continue after the course, right? If somebody's got a
Nice.
good match, they just stay in touch of like, hey, I did my finances this week. How are you doing?
Right.
And so that's really powerful. But the thing that I've tended to offer after Money Skills is I'll offer masterminds and next level programs, right? For those
Cool.
folks who want to go deeper, which is always such a treat for me to be able to work with the folks who are like ready to dig in even more, because I was a trauma therapist in my time practicing. I did EMDR and complex trauma and dissociation. So like I like the depth, and being able to work with those folks who are already engaged and doing the work and ready to take this to another level is such a treat for me. So I do masterminds generally about once a year. And then I also have another course for group practice owners because that's a whole other bag of nuts. And I've got a course that I run once a year, which gets into the complexity of that. And that's always a very special group of people. And that's how I feel generally about our community, is such a specific group of people who, first of all, like me, so they have that in common. So usually there's like some sort of common traits, right? But you'll get folks on the call and it's just like, have we all known each other forever? Like people are from
Right.
all over North America, right? Which is
Right.
the beauty
Right.
of the internet, is it brings together folks from, you
Yeah.
got somebody from like Colorado, Florida, the Yukon, Alberta, BC, and everybody feels like, they're long lost friends. So yeah, that power of those groups, it always blows my mind when I have a wonderful group of practitioners together.
That universality is such a great reminder that, one, we're not alone, and one, we're not all that crazy.
Yes.
There's others out there who are doing the same things we are, trying to master various areas of life. So you have the Money Skills for Therapists, you have the Masterminds course, you have a practice one you take folks through once a year as well. I would love folks, I know we're kind of winding down on our time today, but for folks to follow up with you after our podcast today, to learn more about all the programs you're doing, to get in touch with you, how can they do so after they listen today?
Yeah. So if they want to learn about my programs, go to moneynutsandbolts.com. You'll see a link there for courses where you can look at Money Skills for Therapists, which is for solo practitioners. And it's kind of like
Okay.
our step one course. And then Money Skills for Group Practice Owners for folks who are already well established into group practice. so they could learn about those, get on wait lists so they hear about it when the doors open. And then if they want to absorb more of this kind of conversation, I've also got my podcast, Money Skills for Therapists. So same name as my course. And we've just
Nice.
passed 110,000 downloads. I'm pretty happy about that. And
Nice.
so that's a great resource to be able to dig in and listen to conversations like this that I think there needs to be a lot more of in the world.
Very good. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, I've enjoyed the conversation we've had today. What a wonderful thing you're doing as a therapist, the work you've done there, but also just bringing the financial piece. You're giving people control, value in their life. You're giving them probably some serenity, some calm and peace, and a sense of a priority-driven, intentionally driven life. I can't think of a better thing to be living. While at the same time, they begin to contribute to so many people's lives that they get to have in their office and at home. So what a great combination. Well, I've enjoyed having you on the show today. Thank you so much, Linzy, for joining us. And I would love to have you back at some point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Graham.
I also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Linzy and me today. It's always great to have you with us. Regarding our episode, I want to remind you that it and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.